we're going to take the incredibly dense, complex biochemistry of your endocrine pancreas and, well, translate it into something a lot more intuitive. Think of this as a journey through your body's very own internal energy economy. Literally every single second of the day, your cells are making countless microscopic transactions just to keep you alive. And today, we are going to meet the central bank that manages the whole shebang.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The energy economy. 2. Inside the endocrine pancreas. 3. How insulin is released. 4. Insulin's 3 main targets. And finally, 5. When the system fails. We'll start out at a really high level, looking at your overall metabolism, and then zoom all the way down to the cellular locks and keys. Let's dive in.
Section 1, the energy economy. To kick things off, we really have to look at the absolute most fundamental challenge of human survival, which is energy management. Think about it for a second. We eat in phases, right? You might have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, with hours and hours of fasting in between. Yet your body demands a continuous, non-stop expenditure of energy just to keep your heart beating and your brain thinking. So how exactly does our internal economy balance this massive mismatch between when we take in energy and when we actually spend it? Well, the answer is intermediary metabolism. It's a constant, brilliant balancing act going on inside your cells. On one side, you've got anabolism. This is when your body acts like a saver, taking smaller molecules and building them up into larger ones to store energy for later. On the exact flip side is catabolism. That's when your body acts like a spender, breaking down those large, stored molecules to release the energy you need right this second. And it's a perfect perpetual loop of supply and demand. Catabolic reactions break things down, they release a bit of heat, and they transfer energy to a molecule called ATP. Now, ATP is essentially the cold, hard cash of your cells. Your cells then take that ATP and spend it to power the anabolic reactions, which builds complex molecules like glycogen, proteins, and triglycerides to pack away for a rainy day. What's really fascinating here is how glucose acts as the central currency in this entire system. When you have an excess of glucose, it flows into your savings accounts through a process called glycogenesis, turning into glycogen. But the moment you need immediate power, it flows the other way. It gets spent through glycolysis to create pyruvates, and ultimately, that ATP cache we just talked about. But to manage all this constantly moving currency, the body absolutely needs a highly regulated central bank. Which brings us to Section 2, inside the endocrine pancreas. The history behind how we figured this out is actually pretty wild. Back in 1889, researchers Murring and Minkowski were really just trying to study digestion, so they surgically removed a dog's pancreas. But then they noticed something totally bizarre. Flies started swarming the dog's urine. Why? Well, without a pancreas, the dog's blood sugar skyrocketed, making its urine incredibly rich in sugar. That accidental observation kicked off a mad dash that eventually led Banting and Best to isolate insulin in 1921, perform the first human injection in 1922, and secure a very well-deserved Nobel Prize the following year. Now, while the pancreas does handle a lot of digestion, the real magic for our energy economy happens in these tiny cellular neighborhoods called the islets of Langerhans. These little clusters make up the endocrine, meaning hormone-secreting portion of the pancreas. Inside these islets, you have this incredibly diverse community of cells. You've got alpha cells, beta cells, delta cells, and PP cells, and each of them produces different metabolic hormones. But the absolute heavy lifters here are the beta cells. They make up roughly 60 to 80% of the entire islet, and their job is absolutely vital. They are responsible for minting and releasing insulin, which is literally the master key to regulating your body's entire energy economy. Which leads perfectly into Section 3, how insulin is released. Now that we know where the key is made, let's explore the incredibly elegant machinery of how it actually gets deployed into your bloodstream. Let's track exactly how this built, because a beta cell is basically a microscopic glucose sensor. Step 1. Your blood sugar rises after a meal and glucose enters the beta cell through a specialized door called the GLUT2 transporter. Step 2, the cell metabolizes that glucose through glycolysis, which heavily ramps up internal ATP production. Step 3, this sudden influx of ATP cache causes an ATP-sensitive potassium channel to slam shut, altering the cell's electrical charge. And finally, Step 4, this electrical shift pops open a calcium door. That sudden rush of calcium is the ultimate trigger that forces the cell to push insulin out into the blood. Visualizing this chemical domino effect is just fascinating. You've got the glucose molecules coming in through the GLU2 transporter door, heading straight to the mitochondria, which starts pumping out ATP. That ATP shuts the potassium channel, which immediately opens the calcium channel. And the result? Tiny vesicles filled with insulin granules are physically pushed to the edge of the cell membrane and dumped straight into circulation to go do their job. But there's a really cool twist to this whole process, known as the incretin effect. Turns out you actually get a massive spike in insulin when you drink glucose, compared to a much smaller spike if you were to inject that exact same amount of glucose directly into a vein. Why would that be? Well, when you eat, your gastrointestinal tract releases hormones called incretins, specifically GLP-1 and GIP. These gut hormones rush ahead to prime the pancreas, basically yelling, "Get ready, a bunch of sugar is coming," before the glucose has even hit the bloodstream. So the pancreas has sensed the glucose, the beta cells have fired, and insulin is now circulating in your blood. Where does it go? Section 4. Insulin's 3 main targets. It seeks out 3 primary warehouses to store that newly acquired energy currency. Once it arrives, insulin acts like an incredibly strict storage manager across these 3 targets. First up, your muscle cells. Insulin forces them to absorb glucose and amino acids, commanding them to synthesize and conserve protein. Second, your adipose tissue, your fat cells. Insulin drastically increases triglyceride storage and strictly blocks a process called lipolysis, totally preventing the breakdown of fat. And third, the liver. Insulin tells your liver to pack away glucose as glycogen and issues a hard stop on manufacturing any new sugars from scratch. But getting into those muscle and fat cells isn't a given. Unlike the liver or the brain, resting skeletal muscle and fat cells actually have their doors locked to glucose by default. To get inside, they require a specific transport protein called GLUT4 to be moved to the cell's surface. And here's the catch. GLUT4 only moves when insulin gives the explicit command. This is where insulin truly acts like a master key. Without insulin, the GLUT4 transporter is just sitting idle deep inside the cell, while all the glucose molecules are locked out. But the second insulin binds to its receptor on the outside of the cell membrane, it triggers a massive signal cascade. This physically moves the GLUT4 vesicle up to the surface, embedding it right into the membrane. The door clicks open, and the glucose can finally rush in.
It is a beautifully elegant system, but we have to ask the hard question: what happens to the human body when this economic system crashes? When the central bank completely fails to regulate the currency? Section 5. When the system fails.
We essentially see 2 main types of market crashes here, collectively known as diabetes mellitus. In type 1, which typically has a young onset, autoimmune antibodies literally destroy the beta cells. The pancreas just stops producing insulin entirely. The keys are completely missing, which means the patient requires lifelong insulin injections. But in type 2, which generally develops in adults, you have insulin, but the tissues become resistant to it. The locks are essentially jammed. Your pancreas is pumping out more and more insulin, but your muscle and fat cells just won't open their doors. So how do doctors actually spot this crisis? They look at a specific metric called HbA1c, or glycosylated hemoglobin. It basically measures the average amount of glucose that's become stuck to your red blood cells over the last few months. Under current diagnostic criteria, an A1C of 6.5% or higher is the threshold for diagnosing diabetes. It's the ultimate red flag indicating that there's way too much unspent currency just floating around in your bloodstream. But what if we flip it? What if there's an overproduction of insulin? Well, that pulls way too much glucose out of the blood, literally starving your central nervous system of energy. We call this hypoglycemia, and it happens when blood glucose drops below 4 millimolar. The symptoms are terrifying. Your brain goes into a panic, triggering hallucinations and extreme nervousness. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks into overdrive, causing heavy sweating, trembling, and a rapidly racing heart. If levels dip below 2.8, you're looking at a total loss of consciousness or even a hypoglycemic coma. Ultimately, everything we've talked about in this explainer today circles back to this one core foundational truth: intermediary metabolism. Your daily survival is completely dependent on the relentless, invisible chemical conversions happening inside your cells every single second. This delicate, incredible balance of breaking down food and storing it effectively is quite literally the definition of being alive. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Your beta cells, your GLUT4 transporters, the intricate feedback loops of insulin, they are working flawlessly behind the scenes to manage whatever you choose to put into your body. So the next time you sit down for a meal, ask yourself, if your pancreas is working this incredibly hard to balance your internal energy economy, are you giving it the right currency?